crystal of her designer heel came down on my oxygen mask with the same deliberate precision she used to crack eggs into the Limoges porcelain at Fortnum's. Crunch. The plastic shattered under the sole. Then she kicked it across the wet pavement, watched it disappear down the storm drain without blinking once. My lungs were already collapsing from the damage. Without that equipment, I had perhaps 4 minutes before my consciousness started folding in on itself. She didn't care. She never cared. "Look at you," she said, her voice cutting through the theater alley like a scalpel. "Coughing like some animal at the moment. Your brother's career is finally launching. You're doing this deliberately, aren't you? You've always been jealous of Oliver's potential. Sabotaging everything he's built. Breathe on your own. I absolutely forbid you from crying." From the fire exit, a stagehand was fumbling with a cigarette, trying to light it with shaking hands. The flame went out. He just stood there, frozen, watching my mother smooth the hem of her couture gown as though the imported silk might catch something contagious from the daughter she was suffocating on the concrete. I couldn't breathe. My hands clawed at my throat, both palms scraping against skin that felt like it was closing from the inside. The truth was darker than asthma. 3 weeks ago, on a narrow street outside Damascus, an IED had detonated 6 feet from my body. I had thrown myself backwards into the blast radius to shield the soldiers behind me. The concussive force had crushed my entire thoracic cavity. My lungs hadn't healed properly. They weren't even close to healed. But what tore through me in that moment wasn't the shattered alveoli or the hemorrhaging tissue. It was the woman who had carried me for 9 months stripping away my last lifeline because I was inconvenient to her evening. To her, I wasn't Lieutenant Commander Eleanor Hayes, Royal Navy Explosive Ordnance Disposal Specialist. I wasn't the person who had clawed her way back from a body bag. I was invisible, a debt, a stain she wanted to grind beneath her heel until it stopped existing. But before I tell you how I used absolute silence to transform this extravagant nightmare into a death sentence for the entire family, hit that like button and subscribe to Hidden Family Infidelity and Revenge. Stay, because what unfolds next will give you exactly the satisfaction you're waiting for. The fire door banged open again. Oliver stepped out wearing a hand-tailored dinner jacket with silk lapels. The kind of suit that costs more than some people's annual salary. Without breaking stride, he swung his polished leather shoe and drove it into my shin. Not an accident. A deliberate, measured kick. He looked down at me the way you'd look at something that had crawled out of a drain, then flicked a folded document into the puddle .5150 hold. Involuntary psychiatric detention under the Mental Capacity Act. The paperwork that strips every legal right, every shred of autonomy, and places your finances into someone else's hands entirely. "Sign it," he commanded. He tapped his violin bow against his palm like a judge striking a gavel. "She needs someone legally responsible for her military compensation before she drinks it away or loses it on some conspiracy website. She's completely delusional." "Hand her the pen." Richard, the family solicitor, materialized from behind Oliver's shoulder. He was already uncapping a ballpoint, his weasel face sheened with sweat. He crouched down and held it toward my bloodied fingers like he was offering a treat to a dog. I didn't look up, didn't reach for it, didn't even flinch. The training had been beaten into my nervous system over 8 years and 4 operational deployments. When you're knelt over a live device with nothing between you and detonation except steady hands and controlled breathing, you learn what fear actually is. One tremor, one ragged breath, 1 second of panic sends vibration through a pressure plate that triggers the mine beneath you. Right now, in this alley, 1 tear or 1 scream would give them the legal precedent they needed. 1 moment of weakness and they'd call the police to haul me away in restraints. I pulled my hand back, placed my bleeding fingertip against the crystal face of my military-issue watch .22, got right on schedule. I forced my damaged lungs into shallow, controlled breaths, locked every muscle in my face, gave them absolutely nothing to work with. Mother crouched beside me, close enough that I could smell Chanel and champagne on her breath. Her voice went surgical. each word placed with the precision of a blade designed to cut through the last membrane of self-worth. The consultant at my golf club has already signed the certification that you are a danger to society. Homeless, unmarried, unemployable, no prospects, no future. Sign over full financial authority to your brother immediately. If you refuse, I will personally telephone the psychiatric emergency line and have you transported to a locked facility where you will remain indefinitely. This family does not tolerate a delusional, ungrateful parasite. What she actually wanted was transparent. Strip every penny of my military disability allowance, every pound of hazard pay I'd accumulated, every single cent of combat zone savings I'd built up over 8 years of eating ration packs in tents. Funnel it all into Oliver's entertainment company, which was hemorrhaging money at such a rate that the accountants had stopped bothering with the spreadsheets. My chest burned. Oxygen deprivation clawed at the edges of my vision, but my mind ran cold as the steel wall I was leaning against let them scream. Let them threaten. Fighting back right now, physically or verbally, was the worst tactical decision I could make. One outburst and they'd use it as evidence. One shove and Richard would have the police here in 3 minutes flat. Silence was the most devastating weapon in any arsenal. Let Oliver wave his mobile around and threaten the crisis helpline. That call was never going to connect because, from the corner of my eye past Oliver's ridiculous jacket and Richard's trembling hands, I had already spotted something far more important. The reinforced black Range Rover, bearing Ministry of Defense registration plates, was rolling slowly into the far end of the alley. Rolling silently. And it was carrying the only authority whose judgment mattered tonight. My mind drifted backward. A memory pulled me under like a riptide. The sound of a carving knife scraping across a china plate. Thanksgiving 2 years prior. The same dining room table where my grandmother used to say grace before meals. Oliver sat at the head of it, wearing a 200 pounds cashmere sweater with the sleeves pushed up to his elbows. His 300-pound haircut was still holding its shape at 21 in the evening. He gripped the carving knife and dragged it across the turkey platter, and the ceramic screech it made drilled into the silence like a dentist's instrument. Then he pointed the greasy blade directly at my face. 30 years old and still making the family anxious about you, Eleanor. Isn't that humiliating? Military people are just glorified manual laborers. Brainless grunts who couldn't manage anything in a proper economy. You couldn't even run a market stall. This lecture came from a man whose entertainment startup was 3 months behind on payroll. His assistant had quit. His office manager had filed a wage complaint with ACAS. He owed his sound engineer 47,000 pounds, but the cashmere was spotless. That night, I sat in the corner seat, the one closest to the kitchen. The chair with the wobbly leg that nobody had fixed in 15 years. The chair that marked you as someone who didn't matter enough to repair. My grandmother used to sit there. During Christmas dinner when Mother started in on me, she'd squeeze my hand under the table. Once, when I was 12, she pulled me into the kitchen and held my face in both hands. You are the only genuine thing in this family, Eleanor. Don't ever let them convince you otherwise. She died the year I joined the Navy. Left me her trust fund. Left Mother nothing. That decision had been poisoning Mother's mind ever since, black and infected. Every insult she'd thrown at me over the past decade was just the fever from it. I poured myself a glass of the cheapest wine on the table, the bottle nobody else would touch. Drank it to the dregs without saying a word. James carved another slice and dropped it on his plate with a wet slap. Mother watched me from across the table. Her fork was motionless. Her eyes were doing that calculation they always did, the one where she weighed how much I was worth alive versus how much trouble I'd be dead. 3 days before that Thanksgiving dinner, 2 police officers had knocked on my flat door at 06 in the morning. Mother had filed a report with falsified medical records, documents from a psychiatrist she'd paid through her golf club network, claiming I suffered from severe combat-induced psychosis and posed an imminent danger to myself and others. She wasn't trying to get me help. She was filing for emergency conservatorship over my grandmother's trust. The officers left my apartment because I answered the door at parade rest, spoke in complete sentences, showed them my recent deployment records, and made them coffee. There was nothing wrong with me. But the blade my family had planted that morning severed the last thread of kinship I'd been clinging to. Back in the alley, present tense, Oliver was still screaming. "She's gone mute. The psychotic break is happening right now. Richard, call the ambulance. Give her the sedative injection." His arrogance hadn't shifted 1 degree in 24 months. To him, the hazard pay I'd earned by dismantling roadside explosives under brutal desert sun was simply a family slush fund. A piggy bank labeled Oliver's bailout. Here's what he didn't know, what none of them knew. The morning after that Thanksgiving, whilst Mother and Oliver were still asleep in their 500 thread count sheets, I was already dressed. I pulled on a plain black blazer over a fresh white shirt, removed my dog tags, put them in my pocket, drove 60 kilometers to a corporate law office in the city that specialized in hostile acquisitions. I didn't file a lawsuit against my mother. Lawsuits are loud, slow, and easy to see coming. I chose the method I knew best, the combat engineer's method. You don't attack the fortress, you dig underneath it. You plant the charge in the foundation, and then you wait for them to throw a party on top of it. Sitting in a leather chair across from a lawyer who charged £900 per hour, I signed the Articles of Incorporation for Vanguard Holdings Limited, a shell corporation sealed behind 3 layers of anonymous ownership. Single directive: identify, acquire, and consolidate every pound of outstanding debt belonging to Oliver Caldwell's entertainment company. My brother was building his empire on quicksand, and I had just bought the quicksand. Oliver used the scroll end of his violin to flip up the frayed hem of my field jacket like he was lifting something disgusting he'd found on the pavement. "Look at this," he said, loud enough for Richard and Mother to hear. Living in that box apartment in the Meridian building, that crumbling dump in the East End. Bet the walls are crawling with damp, too ashamed of her own poverty to invite anyone over. Admiral Richardson will be here any minute. Keep this piece of trash out of his line of sight. He hawked and spat. The glob of saliva landed 2 inches from my right boot. I looked down at my boots. They were scuffed. The deepest scratch came from last Tuesday when I climbed a service ladder to the Meridian's roof to personally inspect the HVAC ducting after a tenant on floor 6 reported problems. My prodigy brother called the Meridian a rotting pile of bricks. I called it a £4.2 million asset that I'd purchased 6 months ago with a personal check. Cash. No mortgage, no cosigner. The hand that signed the deed still carried calluses from 8 years of gripping wire cutters over live explosive ordnance. And the notary at the title company had stared at my knuckles for 5 full seconds before stamping the paperwork. I gutted the building, rebuilt it from the inside out, and took the entire top floor for myself. A private penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Thames. I lived there now. In the sky above everything Oliver thought he owned. Oliver continued performing for his audience of 2. My company leases premium-grade office space. Top of the line. "You were born to be a doormat, Eleanor. Just something to wipe my shoes on." He flicked invisible lint from his lapel with a satisfied grin. What he had no idea about, what made my poker face so much easier to maintain, was that the miserable flat in 4B he'd been posting hate mail to for the past year was nothing but a decoy. A rented postal box I maintained specifically to keep him chasing a ghost. The real joke, the one I swallowed every time I read his letters, was this: that premium grade A office space his company was so proud to lease sat on the 3rd floor of the Meridian. My building. He paid rent to me every month and didn't know it. 4 weeks ago, I had picked up a fountain pen, underlined the words "Final Notice, Eviction Pending, 60 days past due," lease violation on his letter, and mailed it to his office with a return address he'd never bothered to check. He was standing in this alley right now, kicking filth at my uniform, completely blind to the fact that the signature on the document threatening to throw his company onto the street belonged to the sister he was spitting on. Past Oliver's shoulder, Through the gap between his arm and the wall, I could see it. The gunmetal gray 1973 Porsche 9111 Carrera sitting like a trophy in the VIP car park. Spotless. Waxed. Not a single scratch. 1 year ago, 3 commercial banks had reviewed Oliver's financials, looked at the crater where his balance sheet used to be, and refused to roll over his debt. He was 6 weeks from forced liquidation. The walls were closing in and he could hear them. I used Vanguard's corporate identity to contact those same banks. Bought every pound of his defaulted paper at 42 pence on the pound. Then, through Vanguard, I extended him a brand new secured credit facility, £650,000. The stated purpose was corporate restructuring, pay the vendors, settle the wage claims, hire a proper CFO. On paper, it looked like salvation from a faceless private equity firm. Oliver never asked who was behind the curtain. He never does. I sat in a dark office the night the funds cleared, watching the dispersal scroll across a monitor. Within 72 hours, instead of paying his suppliers or the employees who'd been protesting outside his office for back wages, Oliver pulled £180,000 from the loan account and wired it to a dealership in Stuttgart, the Porsche. He filed it internally as partner-facing image development expenditure. I didn't call, didn't send a warning. I typed one line into the asset ledger, secured collateral unit 04. Then I closed the laptop and went to bed. The day the car arrived, Oliver drove it straight to the naval base where my EOD unit was stationed. He talked his way past the civilian gate by dropping my name, telling security he was there to surprise his sister. He pulled up to the training yard, leaned across the center console, and rolled down the passenger window. He waited until I walked over. Waited until my entire squad, the men and women I'd bled beside, were watching. Then he pulled a 50-pound note from his wallet, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it at my feet on the gravel. Go buy yourself some real clothes, Eleanor. I can't have my business contacts finding out my older sister is a technician who crawls around in the dirt dismantling bombs for a wage. Every syllable was designed to humiliate me in front of the people I served with. Behind me, I could hear Petty Officer Reyes take a step forward. His fists were already clenched. Chief Warrant Officer Dunham put a hand on his chest and held him back. They saw it. The squad saw all of it. And the silence that fell over that training yard was heavier than any IED blast I'd ever absorbed. He had used my own blood money, the hazard pay I'd earned kneeling over live ordnance in 48-degree heat, to spit on my dignity in front of my family, my real family, the one that actually bled for each other. I looked down at that crumpled note on the gravel. I put my boot on top of it, pressed down until the paper ground into the dust. Then I turned my back and walked toward the barracks without one word. He was too drunk on his own arrogance to have ever read the fine print of the loan agreement. He didn't know Vanguard wasn't some guardian angel. Vanguard was the senior secured creditor, the highest priority lien holder. Every mile he put on that Porsche's odometer, every champagne cork he popped, every napkin he monogrammed with his initials was depreciating an asset that already belonged to me. Everything was documented. Everything was time-stamped. The trap was fully armed. It just needed a trigger. Hold her hand down. Mother's voice cracked through the alley like a whip. Richard surged forward, a man suddenly remembering which side was paying his retainer. He yanked an ink pad from inside his leather briefcase and ripped open the seal with his teeth. He grabbed my right hand, the one still sticky with blood from the scrapes, and tried to force my thumb toward the signature line on the 5150 order. One fingerprint. That's all they needed to make it legal, to make me disappear. I locked every muscle in my shoulder and forearm, pulled my core tight the way you do before absorbing a blast. My pulse hammered against the inside of my ribs, but my hand didn't move. Richard leaned his weight into it. His colognes smelled like department store samples and desperation. This was the red line. The line I'd drawn in my own mind before I ever set foot in this alley tonight. If his hand pushed mine down one more inch, 8 years of close-quarters combat reflex would fire before I could stop it. But something else fired first. A memory. Richard's fingers wrapped around my wrist, and suddenly I was 7 years old again. standing in the hallway of our old house. Mother's hand clamped around the same wrist, dragging me toward my room because I'd spilled juice on Oliver's new shirt. She held on until the joint popped. Then she let go, walked away, didn't look back. 25 years later, a different hand on the same wrist and the same impulse to fight surging through the same nerve pathways. But I held. Not because I was afraid, because the Range Rover was 12 seconds away. The waiting paid off in less than 3 seconds. A wall of white LED light exploded from the far end of the alley and hit Oliver full in the face. He threw up both arms, blinded, staggering backward into Richard. Tires screamed against wet asphalt. A controlled emergency stop. The reinforced door of the Range Rover swung open, the weight of it visible in how slowly it moved. Armed escorts in tactical black stepped out carrying automatic rifles held at low ready, and they formed 2 disciplined columns flanking the vehicle. Nobody spoke. The silence that filled the space wasn't the absence of noise. It was the presence of authority so absolute it compressed the air. Mother felt it first. Her fingers released my arm like my skin had turned white hot. The moment she recognized the 4-star insignia on the uniform stepping out of that vehicle, her entire body language rebuilt itself from the ground up. She smoothed the front of her gown, straightened her necklace, and scurried forward on her crystal heels with a smile so desperate and groveling. It would have been funny if it weren't so vile. Admiral Richardson. Oh, please pardon this little disturbance. My mentally ill daughter is having one of her episodes. She's just damaged goods the military shipped home, discharged. Delusional. Please, sir, don't trouble yourself with this. Richardson didn't take her hand, didn't look at it. His eyes were sharp and cold as a bird of prey, scanning the scene. Once across Oliver's stained jacket, once across Richard's ink-smeared fingers, then locked onto me, slumped against the brick, torn collar, blood on my hands. And then something shifted. The tarnished silver chain around my neck slipped free as my collar sagged. The EOD insignia pendant dropped into the light, blackened with old gunpowder residue, scratched and dented from a blast that should have killed me. Richardson's gaze caught it and stopped dead. The granite face of a man who had buried sailors and given speeches at the Naval Memorial transformed in front of everyone. Have you ever had to stand in silence and watch your own flesh and blood use lies to crush everything you've bled for, right in front of a stranger's eyes? If you understand that suffocating feeling of rage trapped so deep in your throat you can't even scream, hit like on this video. And please leave a comment sharing your story, because here, you are not alone. Richardson's arm shot forward and shoved Mother aside. She stumbled on those crystal heels and caught herself against the wall, mouth open, too shocked to protest. The Admiral didn't pause, despite the 4 stars on his shoulders. Despite the razor-pressed uniform and 38 years of chain-of-command protocol drilled into his posture, he lowered himself to both knees in the filthy puddle directly in front of me. Mud and alley water soaked through his dress trousers instantly. He didn't look down. He reached back without turning his head, and his aide placed an emergency oxygen canister into his open hand with the precision of a surgical nurse. Richardson pressed the mask against my nose and mouth himself, one hand cradling the back of my skull to hold my head steady. His hands were shaking, the thick, sun-scared, rope-like calloused hands of a man who had commanded carrier strike groups through 3 wars were trembling as his fingertips traced the map of burn scars running from behind my right ear down to the base of my neck. He recognized those scars. They were attached to a classified after-action report that sat in a locked cabinet at the Ministry of Defense, with a George Cross recommendation on its cover page. The alley froze solid. Every person in it stopped moving at the same instant, as if someone had hit pause on a film. Oliver's cigarette tumbled from between his lips and hissed dead in the puddle. Richard backed up until his shoulder blades scraped brick. The security detail moved in perfect synchronization, hands lifting to holstered sidearms, fanning outward into a steel perimeter that physically walled off my family from the space around me. The quiet, deliberate snap of safety catches disengaging echoed off the walls one after another, Every avenue of interference was sealed shut. Richardson lifted his head. The blood vessels in his eyes had gone scarlet. He stared at my mother the way a man stares at something he has just classified as an enemy combatant. "You called the savior of the Third Fleet defective." His voice didn't rise, it dropped. It went low and tight, vibrating with a controlled fury that made the armed men around him shift their weight. "This woman does not have asthma. These lungs were crushed because she threw her own body against a blast door and absorbed the full concussive wave of an IED detonation to buy 300 of my sailors the 97 seconds they needed to evacuate through the North Corridor. 300 men. She held that door while her ribcage was collapsing and her lungs were filling with blood. She was 32 years old and she did not scream once. Mother's jaw unhinged. Every molecule of blood drained from her face so fast she looked embalmed. The gown, the diamonds, the Chanel. All of it hung on her like costume jewelry, on a mannequin that had just been unplugged. Behind her, Oliver's body had gone rigid. The arrogance, the sneering, the casual cruelty, all gone, replaced by the blank, fish-eyed stare of a man who has just realized that the person he's been kicking is the same person the most powerful military officer in the room would kneel in the mud. For Richardson rose to his feet, turned, and pointed his index finger directly into Oliver's face. So close the tip nearly touched his nose. The Ministry of Defense believed she was killed in action. We had the flag folded. The honor guard was assembled. Her name was being engraved on the memorial wall. And then she woke up in a field hospital with 70% lung capacity, and a note pinned to her chart that said, "Miracle." Her blood was spilled, saving her brothers and sisters in arms. And she comes home to this. He swept his arm across the alley. Across the puddle, the drain grate, the 5150 papers floating in the grime, to be suffocated by her own family under a drainage pipe. I pressed the mask harder against my face and inhaled. Felt the oxygen push through the damaged tissue, forcing open the collapsed sacs one by one. Each breath hurt. Each breath meant I was still alive. The stage was set. Oliver's mouth was still moving, but nothing that came out qualified as language. Just fragments. Syllables shaking loose from a brain that couldn't process the controlled demolition happening around it. "No, sir. You're mistaken. She's just a freeloader. She owes me money. She..." A high-pitched electronic tone sliced through his stammering. The tablet in Richard's trembling hands lit up with a long, urgent ping. An email had just landed in his inbox, pushed through by the automated notification system of the commercial court. Red judicial seal across the header. Richard's eyes dropped to the subject line. The cold blue glow from the screen crawled up his face like rising water. And as he read, his features collapsed inward. His forehead crumpled. His lips pulled back from his teeth. His nostrils flared. The color in his cheeks drained to gray in less than 2 seconds. His hands shook so violently that the 5150 folder slipped from under his arm. The pages separated and fluttered down into the puddle, fanning out across the dirty water like playing cards dealt by a drunk. Richard swallowed. The sound his throat made was a dry animal click, audible in the silence. Sweat broke across his hairline and rolled down his temples, soaking into his collar until the white cotton turned translucent. "Sir, Mrs. Margaret." Richard's voice came out, cracked and raw. The sound of a man watching his career and his freedom disappear on a screen. He grabbed a fistful of Oliver's vest and yanked him backward with both hands, hard enough to rip a seam. "Stop talking. Shut your mouth. Look at this. Look at the ownership structure report for Vanguard Holdings. The entity holding 100% of the equity is not an anonymous holding company. It's not a fund. It's not a trust." I reached up and peeled the oxygen mask away from my face, set it on the ground beside me, placed both palms flat on my kneecaps. Then I stood up slowly, inch by inch. The motion was deliberate, unhurried, heavy, with the kind of pressure that has nothing to do with physical force. It was the pressure of a truth that cannot be unsaid. Even Richardson's armed guards, trained to hold a perimeter against gunfire, took an instinctive half-step to the side as I rose to full height. I brushed a streak of alley mud from my left shoulder. straightened my spine the way I'd done 10,000 times in formation. Then I locked my eyes onto Oliver's dilating pupils and held them there. Read the chairman's name out loud, Richard. Let him hear it. Richard rotated the tablet screen toward Oliver. His hands were vibrating so badly the text jumped, but the words were clear enough. Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Holdings Limited. Each syllable fell out of his mouth like a tooth coming loose. Is Eleanor Hayes. Something ruptured behind Oliver's eyes. Not figuratively. You could watch the exact moment his prefrontal cortex overloaded and shut down the way a fuse box blows when you feed it too many amps. His face went slack, then rigid, then slack again. He stumbled backward, arms flailing. The violin bow clattered to the ground. Fraud, he shrieked. You're violating military law. Active duty officers are prohibited from holding equity stakes in operating corporations. The share purchase is void. That company is still mine. I stepped forward. My boots hit the wet pavement in a cadence as steady and regular as a drum march. 1 step, 2 steps, 3, until I was close enough to see the sweat running down his sideburns. I know federal law, Oliver. Better than your solicitor does. My voice came out flat, stripped of warmth, stripped of anger, stripped of everything except the cutting edge. I didn't purchase your equity. I purchased your debt. All of it. Every defaulted loan, every unpaid invoice, every bounced check, every lien. I am not your business partner. I am your senior secured creditor. I hold the first priority claim on every asset your company and you personally own. I reached into the inside pocket of my field jacket, pulled out a rolled copy of the master loan agreement, and threw it directly into his chest. It bounced off his sternum and unrolled at his feet in the mud, the Vanguard letterhead facing upward. I'll declare bankruptcy. Oliver's voice cracked into a register I'd never heard from him before. High. Desperate. A cornered animal baring its teeth at the trap. Chapter 7. Liquidation. Your investment will be wiped out. You'll lose everything you put in. I smiled. It was a small, precise expression. The kind of smile that belongs on the face of someone who built the detonation sequence 2 years ago and has been watching the countdown timer ever since. You didn't read Clause 4, did you, little brother? Cross-collateralization. The instant your company files for Chapter 7, the outstanding debt automatically triggers a personal asset lien. Your mansion in Surrey, your music catalog royalties, and that Porsche 911 sitting in the VIP car park with 6,000 miles on it. Every single asset transfers to me immediately. No appeal, no delay. I rotated my wrist and checked the time 22:15, and there's Clause 12. Ethical misconduct. The fact that you and our mother physically assaulted, verbally threatened, and publicly degraded your senior creditor in the documented presence of a United Kingdom government official has triggered the immediate debt acceleration provision. As of 8 minutes ago, when Admiral Richardson's security team activated their body cameras, every bank account under your name was flagged for emergency freeze by the court's automated compliance system. The hold was executed 2 minutes ago. You are officially worth 0. Oliver's legs dissolved. His knees buckled sideways, and he dropped face first into the same puddle of alley water where he'd thrown the 5-1-50 order at me 90 minutes earlier. The tuxedo with the hand-stitched lapels soaked through. The Italian shoes sank into the muck. The prodigy who had spat near my boots was now kneeling in the exact spot where I had been. Except nobody was coming to offer him oxygen. Nobody was coming at all. Mother lunged forward, grabbing at Oliver's shoulders. Get up! Get up, Oliver! She's bluffing, but her voice had lost every ounce of the surgical precision it had carried an hour ago. It was just noise now. Shrill. Cracked. The sound of a woman watching the empire she'd built on her daughter's broken back start to fold in on itself. Richard had already backed himself against the wall, both palms flat on the brick behind him, his eyes darting between Richardson's armed guards and the alley exit like a rat calculating the distance to the nearest hole. Inside the theater, the symphony hit a crescendo. Strings soaring. Horns blaring. The kind of triumphant passage that fills concert halls with standing ovations. Out here, the music bled through the walls like a cruel joke scored to the wreckage. Oliver's grip finally failed. The million-pound violin slipped from his fingers and struck the concrete neck first. The wood splintered with a dry, hollow crack that sounded nothing like music. From a CEO draped in silk to a debtor face down in gutter water. The transformation had taken less than 13 minutes. Admiral Richardson crossed his arms over his chest and looked down at the wreckage of Oliver Caldwell with an expression of professional contempt, so refined it could have been framed. "You wanted me to sponsor your arts foundation tonight, didn't you?" His voice was quiet now, conversational, which made it infinitely more lethal. "Here's what I'm going to do instead. I will send a flag-level advisory to every entertainment network, every studio, every talent agency, every distributor in the national system. Any entity that enters into a contract, a partnership, or so much as a handshake deal with you will be formally classified as acting against the interests of the Royal Navy. That is not a suggestion. It is an order backed by the full weight of the Ministry of Defense. Your career in the arts is over, not suspended, over." He turned his head and looked at Mother. One nod, barely perceptible, arrest her. Two military police officers materialized from behind the Range Rover and closed the distance in 4 steps. They took Mother by both arms, twisted them behind her back with a mechanical efficiency that left no room for struggle. The steel handcuffs snapped shut around her wrists. The sound was a single sharp metallic bite that cut through the alley and hung in the air. "Marin, save your mother." "I'm sorry. I didn't mean any of it. Please, Marin, tell them to stop." She thrashed and screamed. Tears cut channels through the layers of foundation and concealer. Mascara bled down her cheeks in black rivers. The designer gown twisted around her knees. The crystal heels scraped against the pavement as she tried to dig in, tried to resist, tried to do anything except face the consequence she had built with her own hands. An apology that had never existed in 32 years of silence, 32 years of slaps and insults, and forged documents suddenly pouring out the moment cold steel touched her skin. Not remorse, inventory. She was calculating what she could still salvage. Even now, even with the cuffs biting into her wrists, Oliver hadn't moved from the mud. He knelt there, both hands flat on the wet concrete, staring at nothing. The tuxedo was ruined. The violin lay in 2 pieces beside him. The Porsche key fob in his pocket was now the key to a car that belonged to his sister. Everything he had ever built, every lie he had ever told, every pound he had ever stolen was floating face down in a puddle of alley water, dissolving in real time. The arresting officer spoke clearly, his voice carrying the flat authority of a man reading from a script he'd memorized. "You are being detained for aggravated assault and attempted involuntary manslaughter of an active-duty military service member." I stood motionless, my hands at my sides, my breathing controlled. I did not turn around, did not look at her over my shoulder, did not give her the satisfaction of one last glance. I stepped forward over the puddle, where the 5150 order was floating, face down, the ink dissolving into the dirty water, the words losing their shape and their power at the same time. The plan was complete. I hadn't raised my hand against anyone, hadn't screamed, hadn't begged. I had taken her own greed, her own cruelty, her own arrogance, and I had fed it back to her through the legal system until it locked around her wrists. The handcuffs were made of her own choices. I didn't need to touch the metal. Behind me, Mother's screams had dissolved into raw, choking sobs. Oliver hadn't said a word since his face hit the mud. The silence of the broken is always louder than the noise they used to make. Sirens tore the night apart. A specialized military ambulance screamed into the alley. Emergency lights painting the wet brick in alternating red and white. A combat medic in full tactical gear jumped from the passenger side, assessed me in 3 seconds, and guided me onto the stretcher with hands that knew exactly where the damage was. My body surrendered to the padding. Every muscle I had held rigid for the past 90 minutes finally released, and the pain I'd been choking back flooded in all at once. Hot and blinding. As the stretcher slid toward the open rear doors of the ambulance, I saw them through half-closed eyes, soldiers. Dozens of them. They had appeared from behind the perimeter, from beside the Range Rover, from around the corners of the building. They lined the alley in 2 rows, and as the stretcher passed between them, they stepped back in unison and raised their right hands in a slow, formal salute. Rigid, silent, eyes forward, not for a general, not for a politician, for a staff lieutenant in a torn jacket who had paid for their lives with her lungs. Behind them, far behind the sounds of my family. The wailing, the sobbing, the bargaining, shrank and thinned until they were nothing but noise, swallowed by the darkness they deserved. The steel doors of the ambulance closed with a deep, final slam. The world outside ceased to exist. Inside, the air was cool, sterile, threaded with the clean, sharp scent of antiseptic and fresh gauze. This steel box, this 4x2.4-meter chamber of medical equipment and quiet separated me completely from everything. From the chaos, from the manipulation, from the word family used as a weapon, from 32 years of blood dressed up as love. I breathed with my own lungs. No mask, no machine, no one else's permission, it still hurt. A grinding deep ache that I could feel behind my sternum with every inhale. But this was different. This was the pain of tissue healing, of air sacs slowly reinflating, of a body putting itself back together. Not the suffocation of being drained dry by the people who were supposed to fill you up. I reached into my cargo pocket and pulled out the tactical phone. The screen lit up, 2 contacts sat in the address book like the last 2 cockroaches in a building marked for demolition, Mum. Oliver, 32 years of parasites. I didn't tap block. Blocking means you're still flinching at the buzz. Still checking the voicemail. Still leaving a crack in the door. I swiped across both names, held my thumb down, and pressed delete. Permanently. The letters dissolved from the screen. No archive, no backup, no ghost. The £650,000 I'd spent was not revenge money, it was ransom. The price I paid to purchase my own life back from the people who were supposed to protect it and chose to sell it instead. I let my head fall back against the padded bench, closed my eyes. The ambulance began to roll. Revenge, I discovered, does not arrive the way you expect. There is no roar, no fireworks, no fist in the air. It comes as a white silence. A frequency so clean and so empty that for the first time in your life, you can hear your own heartbeat without someone else's fingers around your throat. I am Staff Lieutenant Eleanor Hayes. I am the sole chairman and chief executive officer of Vanguard Holdings Limited. And for the first time in 32 years of breathing on this earth, I felt it. Not happiness, not triumph. Something quieter than that. The actual rhythm of freedom. Not given. Not earned by begging. Taken back, every single chain shattered by the hands they tried to cut off. The most perfect revenge is not a scream. It is the total surgical removal of every ounce of control a toxic person ever held over your life. If you stand with Eleanor's cold, deliberate decision, hit that like button and subscribe to Hidden Family Infidelity and Revenge. And please share this story. Send it to someone who needs it, because somewhere right now, someone is still lying in their own puddle, suffocating under the weight of chains built by the people who were supposed to love them. Let them know the lock can be broken. Let them know they are not alone.